The State of Crypto is presented by Tron, connecting the world to the power of cryptocurrency.
All right, joining us now to discuss is Carole House, former White House advisor and one of the authors of President Biden's crypto regulation executive order. Carole, good morning. So you made CoinDesk's most influential list this year. Much of the executive order focuses was one of the things that you authored. It focuses on money laundering risks, terrorist financing risk, or financial stability risk. Given the danger to consumers this year was crypto lenders and offshore crypto exchanges, was this the right focus?
So first, thank you very much for including the executive order and also highlighting my role in it. I was so proud of that. So thanks very much to CoinDesk. I think absolutely the executive order really focused on all of those key policy priorities that you outlined. And I think that the incidents that we've seen, whether major incidents of malicious state actors compromising the sector for over $500 million, one hack at a time, or looking at instances like what's happened recently with FTX and with certain so-called stablecoins and their collapse and the impact that it's had across the market. That's why the executive order took the approach that it did of pointing to these key risk areas, outlining policy priorities for the entire U.S. government to address them, but also acknowledging the fact that driving the kinds of innovation that will allow for the sorts of built-in protections and things that programmable money and other financial assets can potentially offer to the world, that has to be a priority as well. So I think that the executive order was properly balanced, that was the right area to focus on, both mitigating very real risk, but also fostering the real potential for the underlying technologies here.
But go ahead, Lawrence.
So in that, along those lines, I mean, we've seen this issue come up, of course, that there hasn't been any regulation or there's been lack of regulation of spot crypto exchanges because no one's quite sure who handles it. Would it be the CFTC or the SEC or some other, OCC? For all we know, no one really knows where it should go. When drafting this executive order, was there a hint or at least some sort of, I don't want to say bias towards one or the other or some sort of path, but was there at least any discussion internally of, hey, you know what, we can do this whole, getting all these agencies to contribute to it, but ultimately we think here in the White House, in the executive branch, the best path is this agency or that agency should regulate these assets?
Yeah, there were definitely discussions about what needed to happen for the regulatory framework and where authorities already exist and where they should continue to exist, where they should be expanded, strengthened, and clarified. I think the executive order really pointed to the fact that, as you mentioned, there's not a clear picture exactly of all of the different things that need to be put in place to fill some of the existing gaps, but there's also an acknowledgement of the already long existing framework that covers so much of the activity in this space, and the fact that absence of sufficient compliance with those long existing obligations still has to be sufficiently prioritized and enforced. But aside from that, I would say that the outcomes from the executive order, for example, the fact sheet that the White House published earlier this summer, or towards the end of the summer, that pointed to the fact that the administration will consider a federal payments regulatory framework. That's an example that I think could hint at legislation. It could hint at authorities that the Federal Reserve already has, and then other recommendations in the Future of Money report and related to consumer protections, et cetera, I think will also point to the fact that the administration has an opportunity to take a position on things like what you mentioned, spots market regulation.
Well, the executive order also prompted the Department of Justice to create a team of prosecutors to focus on crypto crimes, recommending laws to better pursue crypto crimes and share information. Could that stop the collapse of something like FTX and the alleged fraud committed by Sam Bankman-Fried, the former CEO?
Yeah, I'll say generally to just trying to combat fraud in the space, and we'll defer specific actions on particular institutions to law enforcement and regulators. But ultimately, yes, I think that more enforcement, more capacity, more capability across law enforcement, prosecutors like Department of Justice, as well as with our international partners. Right now, the United States is really the key the key country that's bringing enforcement actions. There are a few other key nations that are as well, but all of that, the international partnerships and enhancing U.S. capacity to drive more enforcement, whether it's major actions like taking people down or criminal actions, or even just smaller violations for compliance, will actually help to shape the space so that there isn't this kind of massive defrauding.
Just to follow up to that, Sam Bankman-Fried was the second largest Democratic donor of the last campaign during the election cycle. Did you ever have a chance to speak with him? I understand he did come to the White House, speak to President Biden, and if so, what did he have to say?
Gotcha. Honestly, I'm not. I'm not aware of Sam speaking to the president, but I just if that did happen, I think I would defer to the White House. But you're right. We engaged with a lot of different stakeholders, though, with the White House staff and other leadership. So I am totally tracking that was a role that Sam played. I think that some of the messages that he pushed for and supported at the time, whether engaging with the Hill or with other government stakeholders, may have been ones that pointed out to the fact that there was going to be a need for critical regulation in certain parts of DeFi and pushed for other policy objectives. But ultimately, that really didn't speak to the business activities of FTX and his involvement underlying that. Yeah, it would have been more of a discussion on policy.
There was, along those lines of policy, I mean, obviously, he was pretty much pushing for the CFTC to cover the spot markets. And did that in any way affect some of the discussion that was happening inside the White House, given his influence, that it would lean towards the CFTC to regulate the spot markets? And there's been the argument that the reason he wanted the CFTC to do the spot markets is because the CFTC isn't as well funded and isn't as well staffed as the SEC. And that therefore he could, get around some of the issues that the SEC probably would have stopped them with.
Yeah, I honestly wouldn't say that any particular industry voice would have had any kind of outsized or particular impact. White House staff was looking at what every stakeholder was saying, including a lot of people that we disagreed with or agreed with. But ultimately, I think that you did see in the chair of the CFTC's testimony, when in that testimony, it emphasized the fact that the CFTC was also supportive of the CFTC getting more authorities in the DCCPA. So I think all of those issues and trying to balance what industry stakeholders were supporting as well as what the agencies wanted, because obviously there's differences of opinions across the interagency. All of those were accounted for, and I'm sure will continue to be as the administration decides what to do going forward.
Carole, no new laws have been created from this executive order, and there continues to be regulatory uncertainty in the United States. That's a source of frustration. How long do you see this regulatory uncertainty continuing?
Yeah, honestly, I think some of the regulatory uncertainty claims I find a little unfortunate, because I feel that there is clarity around what happens if you are a security or if you are a commodity or when you're a money substitute. Those are the frameworks that already exist.
We still don't know if Ethereum is or is not a commodity or security.
So that's the right point that I really appreciate you pointing to, because even the legislation like DCCPA that provide potentially clarity on who covers spots markets, which would be a new authority, it really doesn't provide clarity on that core issue, on whether or not you are a security or a commodity. And that's really the key thing that I see industry looking to regulators to provide that clarity for.
So getting back to Bankman-Fried, because real quick before we go. So he gave millions of dollars to the Biden campaign. He obviously had a door open for him when you guys were discussing the executive order or coming up with it. Was there any discussion, or have you heard of anything about giving money back from campaigns, and should campaigns give money back to basically it's stolen funds when you look at it? Is there any discussion about how do you give that money to the account holders and people who lost their money with him?
Yeah, I would say I'll defer to the White House, but since I'm not there anymore, but I don't think they would consider it being a door open specifically for Sam. It was that there was a lot of engagement with lots of different stakeholders. But on the campaign piece, I don't think that I'm really qualified to speak to that. A lot of people donate to lots of different people whose positions that they support. So I would not be one to be able to speak on whether there should be some kinds of funds that get returned in that instance. So I can't think of what precedent that would be based on. But
so if the Gambino crime family gave money, then we don't give it to we don't give it back to their victims. I guess that's the.
As I mentioned, I'm not qualified to be able to speak on that.